Lesson 3 of the Elements of Anatomy and Physiology. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Elements of Anatomy and Physiology by William Ruschenberger. Lesson 3. Circulation of the blood. The blood does not remain at rest in the body. It is constantly passing through the organs which it nourishes, and returning to the respiratory apparatus to come in contact with the air to be again distributed to the organs. The continuous passage of the blood from the respiratory apparatus towards all the organs of the body, and the return of the blood from these organs to the apparatus of respiration, constitutes the phenomenon of the circulation. This liquid, as we have seen, moves continually in a sort of circle. After having traversed all the parts which it is destined to nourish, it returns to a particular organ to come in contact with the air, then goes back to the parts whence it came, passes through them, returns again to the apparatus of respiration, and so continues as long as life endures. The apparatus of the circulation, that is to say, the assemblage of organs destined to effect this conveyance or transportation of the blood, is composed, first, of canals or pipes in which the blood runs, second, of the heart, which serves to set it in motion. The heart is the center of the apparatus of the circulation. It is a sort of fleshy pouch communicating with the blood vessels, which, receiving the blood into its interior, and which, by contracting on itself from time to time, forces this fluid into the canals and thus keeps up a continual current in them. Almost all animals have a heart. This organ exists not only in the mammalia, birds, reptiles, and fishes, but also in snails, oysters, and other animals of the class of mollusca, in crabs and lobsters, in spiders, etc. The blood vessels are of two kinds, namely, first, the arteries, which carry the blood from the heart to all parts of the body; second, the veins, which bring this liquid back from all parts of the body to the heart. The arteries spring from the heart and divide into branches which decrease in size and increase in number as they advance, and are distributed to the very numerous parts distant from the heart. The veins present a similar disposition, but which is designed to produce an entirely opposite result, because the blood in these vessels pursues an inverse course. They are very numerous at a distance from the heart, but little by little they unite to form larger canals which, in turn, again unite, so that they terminate at the heart in only one or two large trunks. The ultimate ramifications of the arteries in the substance of the organs are continued into the radicles of the veins, so as to form a series of uninterrupted and narrow canals through which the blood passes through the organs. To these delicate canals which establish the communication between the termination of the arteries and the beginning of the veins is applied to the name of capillary vessels. This name has been given to them in consideration of their extreme fineness, which makes them comparable to hairs. At the extremity opposite to that where we find the capillary vessels, the arteries and veins also communicate with each other by the intervention of the cavities of the heart. The result of this arrangement is that the vascular apparatus forms a complete circle in which the blood moves, constantly returning to its point of departure. The circulating circle may be compared to a tree, the trunk of which is doubled upon itself, so as to cause the ultimate ramifications of the branches to meet the ultimate divisions of the roots. The upper portion of the trunk and roots would represent the veins. In all those animals which most resemble man anatomically, such as the monkey, the dog, horse, ox, etc., the heart is placed between the two lungs, in the cavity of the chest, which anatomists call the thorax. The general form of the heart is that of an inverted cone, the apex down and a little to the left. The size of the heart is very nearly that of the fist of the individual to whom it belongs. This organ is enveloped in a double membranous sac called pericardium, and is suspended in the pericardium by the vessels which arise from its superior and enlarged extremity, but it does not adhere at any other point of its surface to the neighboring parts. The substance of the heart is almost entirely fleshy. It is a hollow muscle, the cavity of which communicates with the arteries and veins. In man and all the mammalia, as well as birds, it has 4 distinct cavities. A thick vertical partition divides it into 2 halves, each one forming 2 cavities, one above the other, a ventricle and an auricle. The 2 ventricles occupy the inferior part of the heart and do not communicate with each other, but each one opens into the auricle above it. The cavities of the left side of the heart contain arterial blood, and those of the right side venous blood. The vessels which convey arterial blood into all the organs take their origin from the left ventricle of the heart, through the medium of a single trunk called the aorta. This great artery first mounts upwards toward the base of the neck, then bends downwards, forming a sort of crook, passes behind the heart and descends vertically, in front of the spine, to the lower part of the belly. In its course, the aorta gives off a great number of branches, the principal of which are: first, the two carotid arteries mount along the sides of the neck and supply the head with blood. Second, the two arteries of the upper extremities successively obtain the names of subclavian, axillary, and brachial arteries, as they pass under the clavicle, or cross the armpit, or descend along the arm to the elbow, where they divide into two branches called the radial and ulnar, or cubital arteries. Third, the intercostal arteries are several in number, and run between the ribs on each side of the body. Fourth, the celiac artery, which is distributed to the stomach, the liver, and the spleen. Fifth, the mesenteric arteries, which ramify upon the intestines. Sixth, the renal arteries, which penetrate into the kidneys. And seventh, the iliac arteries, which in a manner terminate the aorta, and which convey blood to the lower extremities, descend along the thighs, and are there called femoral arteries. Then they divide into many branches which terminate in the feet. The veins, which receive the blood thus transmitted to all parts of the body, follow very nearly the same course as the arteries, but they are larger, more numerous, and generally situated more superficially. A great number of these vessels pass beneath the skin, others accompany the arteries, and at last they all unite to form two great trunks which empty into the right auricle of the heart, and which have received the names of vena cava superior and vena cava inferior. The veins which come from the intestines present an important peculiarity. After uniting in a large trunk, they penetrate the liver, and there ramify like the arteries. There they again unite into a trunk and terminate in the inferior vena cava close to the heart. This arrangement of the vessels is called the system of the vena porta. The venous blood, poured by the vena cava into the right auricle of the heart, descends from it into the ventricle of the same side. The right ventricle of the heart gives rise to a large artery called the pulmonary artery, which next receives this same blood and carries it into the lungs. This vessel divides into two branches, one going to the right and the other to the left, to enter the two corresponding lungs, and are divided into an almost infinity of branches, which are spread over the surface of the little membranous cells of these organs. The capillary vessels by which the pulmonary arteries terminate give rise to veins, which unite together and finally form two large vessels called pulmonary veins, which empty into the left auricle of the heart. Consequently, the pulmonary veins receive the venous blood, which was brought to the lungs by the pulmonary artery, and which has now become arterial by the effect produced on it, by contact with the air in the interior of these organs. They carry it back again to the heart and pour it into the left auricle. Finally, from the left auricle, this fluid descends into the left ventricle, whence we have already seen it issue to be distributed to the different parts of the body through the medium of the aorta and its branches. To recapitulate what has just been said, on the route pursued by the blood in the apparatus of the circulation in mammiferous animals and birds, we see, first, that the venous blood arrives from all parts of the body by the general system of veins. Second, that from these veins it enters the right auricle of the heart. Third, that from the right auricle it passes into the right ventricle. Fourth, that from the right ventricle the venous blood passes through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. Fifth, that in the capillary vessels which form the termination of the pulmonary artery and commencement of the pulmonary veins, this liquid is changed into arterial blood. Sixth, that this arterial blood returns from the lungs through the pulmonary veins and enters the left auricle of the heart. Seventh, that from the left auricle it descends into the ventricle of the same side. Eighth, that from the left ventricle it is forced into the aorta, by which it is distributed to all parts of the body. And ninth, and finally, that in the capillary terminations of the system of canals formed by the aorta, the arterial blood acts upon the organs, is changed there into venous blood, and enters the veins to be carried again to the heart. In accomplishing the circulatory circle, the blood then passes twice through the heart, in the state of venous blood on the right side and in the state of arterial blood in the left side of this organ. Yet the circulation is complete, because the pulmonary and aortic cavities of the heart do not open one into the other, and the venous blood passes through the entire respiratory apparatus to be transmuted into arterial blood. The mechanism by which the blood moves through these vessels is easily understood. The cavities of the heart contract and enlarge alternately, and by contracting they force the blood into the canals with which they, the cavities, are in communication. The two ventricles contract at the same time, and while their sides or parietes relax, the auricles in their turn contract. The movement of contraction bears the name of systole, and the term diastole is applied to the opposite movement, or dilatation. The beating or pulsation of the heart is very frequent. In man of adult age it takes place from 60 to 75 times in a minute. In old men the number of beats is a little increased, and in very young infants it is generally about 120. But a variety of circumstances may influence both the frequency and force of the beats of the heart. They are accelerated by exercise, by moral emotions, and by a great number of diseases. In swooning or syncope they are considerably diminished, or even completely interrupted. The left ventricle in dilating fills with blood, and in contracting afterwards forces out the liquid which it contains. This ventricle communicates only with the left auricle by an opening called the auriculo-ventricular opening, and with the aorta. The blood at the moment of its contraction must then either flow back into the auricle or enter the aorta. Now, around the edges of this auriculo-ventricular opening there is a sort of valve called the mitral valve, which is so arranged as to rise up and close this opening when it is pushed from below upwards. From this construction it happens that when the blood tends towards entering the auricle, the mitral valve is pushed up and interrupts the communication between the auricle and ventricle. Therefore, when the left ventricle contracts, the blood finds no other outlet than the aorta, and enters this vessel, which it distends with more or less force, for its parietes, as well as those of all the arteries, are very elastic. Other valves, situate at the entrance of the aorta, prevent the blood from returning into the left ventricle, so that, pressed by the elastic force of the arterial parietes, it is continually pushed forward from the heart towards the extremities of the arteries. The phenomenon known under the name of the pulse is nothing else than the motion caused by the pressure of the blood against the parietes of the arteries every time that the heart contracts. According to the frequency and force of these motions, we may judge of the manner in which the organ beats, and draw therefrom deductions useful in medicine. But the pulse is not felt in all parts. To perceive it, we must slightly compress an artery of a certain volume between the finger and a resisting surface, of a bone for example, and select a vessel situated near the skin as the radial artery at the wrist. The impulsion received by the blood at its exit from the left ventricle of the heart is communicated to the capillary vessels and to the veins, and determines the progression of the blood in them. But the return of the venous blood towards the right ventricle is favored by some other circumstances. In the veins of the extremities, the membrane which lines these vessels forms a great many folds or valves, which open when the blood pushes them from the extremities towards the heart, and shut so as to close the passage when this fluid flows in a contrary direction. Now this arrangement prevents the blood from flowing back towards the capillaries, and thus facilitates its passage towards the heart, for every time a vein is pressed by the movements of the parts in its vicinity, the blood is pushed forward. The passage of the blood through the right cavities of the heart is effected in the same manner as in the left cavities. Between the right auricle and right ventricle there also exists a valve, called the tricuspid valve, which prevents the blood from returning from the ventricle into the auricle, and by the contractions of this ventricle the blood is forced to circulate in the vessels of the lungs and to arrive at the left auricle. It is the ventricles, as we have seen, which force the blood into the arteries and cause it to circulate. The auricles are a sort of reservoirs, designed to contain the blood arriving by the veins and to pour it into the corresponding ventricles. Such is the march of the blood, not only in man and all the mammalia, but also in birds. In the sequel we shall see that in reptiles and fishes the structure of the heart is less complicated, and that the blood follows a somewhat different direction. Of absorption. The blood, in passing through the veins from their capillary origin in the substance of the organs to their termination in the right auricle of the heart, carries with it all the fluids which in some way filter through the parietes of these vessels. Fluid substances which may be in contact with the surface of the body and of the great hollow cavities in its interior, or which are deposited in the depth of the organs, are, as it were, pumped up more or less rapidly and carried into the torrent of the circulation. To the passage of substances, of whatever kind, from the exterior into the interior of the blood vessels through their parietes, or particular canals, and their mixture with the blood, is given the name of absorption. Substances thus absorbed generally penetrate directly into the veins, but under some circumstances they are carried thither by particular canals called lymphatic vessels. In describing the act of digestion, we shall have occasion to refer again to these vessels. All parts of the body may be the seat of a more or less rapid absorption. It is by this phenomenon that liquids introduced into the stomach are found, a very short time afterwards, mingled with the venous blood, and that certain vapors, mixed with the air drawn into the lungs, sometimes act upon remote parts of the body, such as the brain, as happens when we breathe alcoholic vapors. It is also by absorption alone that we can explain how poisons applied to the lips, the eye, or to a slight erosion of the skin, penetrate into the interior of the body, and cause death, often with as much rapidity as if they had been conveyed directly into the stomach. It is by the absorption which takes place in the substance of all the organs that the old materials, no longer of use and separated from the living tissues by the nutritive act, are poured into the circulating torrent to be carried out of the body. Of exhalation and of secretion. The blood, in circulating through the body, is not limited to the nutrition of the organs through which it passes, and to mingling with it absorbed matters. On passing into certain parts of the body, it abandons a portion of the matters which it contains, and in this way gives birth to the peculiar liquids called humors. This separation of the contained matters from the blood may take place in two ways, by exhalation and by secretion. Exhalation is the separation of a portion of the most aqueous part of the blood, which in some manner filters through the parietes of the vessels. The exhaled liquids do not differ much from serum, except that they contain more water. Sometimes they accumulate in the internal cavities of the body, at others they are diffused over the surface and are evaporated into the air. It is in this way that a considerable quantity of vapor escapes from the lungs, and a very active evaporation takes place upon the surface of the skin. Secretion is the production of certain liquids which resemble the serum in nothing, and which are also formed at the expense of the blood. Tears, saliva, bile, urine, etc., are liquids secreted in this way. The phenomenon of secretion always takes place in particular organs. Sometimes it is seated in the follicles, and sometimes in the glands. The follicles are very small pouches which are strewed through substance of the membranes, and which open upon their surface by small pores. The follicles of the skin secrete the sweat. Those on the edge of the eyelids, which secrete the yellow matter which sometimes accumulates during sleep, are organs of this kind. The glands are more voluminous organs, composed of small granulations united in a compact and distinct mass. These granulations are the seat of secretion, and they generally communicate externally by small tubes or conduits, which uniting together like the roots of a tree, finally form an excretory canal by which the secreted liquid is poured out. The salivary glands, which secrete the saliva, the lacrimal glands, which secrete the tears, and the liver, which secretes the bile, are organs of this class. The act of secretion is not designed simply to produce liquids useful in the exercise of certain functions, such as the saliva and bile, but also to free the blood from the old materials, separated from the tissue of the organs by the act of nutrition, and other useless or injurious matters, which may become mixed with it by the effect of absorption. The secretion of urine, which takes place in the kidneys, situated in the abdomen, one on each side of the spine, and the expulsion of it which follows, is the principal means by which this sort of purification of the blood is effected. End of Lesson 3.